You can't come in here stinking of ashes and expecting me to ruin my $15,000 Persian rug, my sister Rebecca said, physically blocking the door to her house while I held only a backpack with a few belongings I had managed to save. The fire had consumed my entire farm just 12 hours earlier. 43 years of work, memories, and dreams reduced to ashes in a single summer afternoon. The smell of smoke still clung to my skin and clothes, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. "Rebecca, I'm your brother," I muttered, trying to process the coldness in her voice. "I just need a place to sleep tonight while I sort things out with the insurance." Her husband Richard appeared behind her, assessing my appearance with visible contempt. "Sam, you're literally homeless now. We can't have people like you here, especially with my business partners coming over for dinner tomorrow." "People like you." The words pierced like knives. "My name is Sam Morrison, I'm 57 years old, and I never imagined I'd be begging for shelter at my own sister's doorstep. I built my farm with my own hands after our parents died, working 3 jobs to keep Rebecca in college while she pursued her dreams of becoming a lawyer. Now she stood there, wearing a dress that probably cost more than I earned in 2 months, calling me homeless as if I were a stranger begging for change. "But I helped pay for your college," I whispered, feeling my voice break despite my efforts to maintain my composure. "I worked 16 hours a day so you could have this life." Rebecca exchanged an uncomfortable glance with Richard. For a moment, I thought I saw something like guilt in her eyes. But then she straightened her shoulders and her expression hardened again. "That was a long time ago, Sam. People grow up and move on. You should have planned your future better instead of getting stuck on that rundown farm." Rundown farm. The place where I raised award-winning cattle, where I planted orchards that fed half the region, where I took in an abandoned child who now... My mind stopped. The child. Daniel Chun. The 8-year-old Asian boy who showed up at my door 20 years ago, running away from abusive parents. I raised him as my own son, helped him with homework at my kitchen table, taught him to drive the tractor, comforted him during nightmares. Rebecca always treated him like an intruder, as if he were stealing the attention she thought she deserved. Even as an adult, she made snide comments about that Asian boy you insist on calling family. Daniel graduated with a degree in engineering and moved to Silicon Valley 15 years ago. We gradually lost touch, as happens when life takes different directions. But I still had his number saved in my phone. As Rebecca continued to explain why I was an embarrassment to her perfect suburban life, a slow and powerful realization began to take shape in my mind. My sister had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea who she had just rejected. She knew nothing about the man that Asian kid had become. And when she found out, her perfect life would never be the same again. If you're enjoying this story and want to find out how a single phone call can change everything, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next completely transformed our family forever, and Rebecca still had no idea what was coming. "Look at you, Sam," Rebecca said, crossing her arms and sizing me up as if I were an unwanted beggar. "You literally stink of smoke and ashes. I can't have you scaring the neighbors or worse, my clients. My career as a corporate lawyer depends on my reputation, and showing up with a homeless brother isn't going to help me at all." Richard nodded vigorously beside her, adjusting the Rolex watch on his wrist with a calculated movement to draw attention. "Exactly. We've worked hard to build our position in this community. You understand, don't you? It's not personal, it's just business." "It's not personal." The words echoed in my head as I looked at the sister I had raised practically on my own after our parents died. She was only 16 when our mother died of cancer, and I, at 25, gave up my own dreams of engineering to take care of her. "Do you remember when you had pneumonia your senior year of high school?" I asked, my voice coming out hoarser than I intended. "I stayed up 3 nights in a row taking care of you, taking you to the hospital when your fever reached 104. Rebecca rolled her eyes. "That was over 20 years ago, Sam. People grow up, their priorities change. I can't live forever in debt for things from the past." "What about when you wanted to study law at Stanford University but couldn't afford the tuition?" I continued, feeling the pain slowly turning into something warmer, more dangerous. "I sold Dad's tractor, that blue Ford he loved so much, to pay for your first semester." "You chose to do that," Richard interjected, his voice laden with condescension. "No one forced you. Those were your decisions, your responsibilities. Rebecca can't be blamed for your poor financial choices over the years." My poor financial choices. As if working 3 jobs to support an ungrateful sister while she partied at expensive universities was a poor financial decision. Rebecca began to slowly close the door. Sam, I really feel sorry for your situation, but you need to understand our position. Maybe you can call a local shelter, or see if the church has any assistance programs. Local shelter. Church. She was literally directing me to charities when I had sacrificed 2 decades of my life to give her everything she wanted. You know I raised Daniel Chun on our farm, I said, my voice taking on a dangerous calm that she didn't know how to interpret. That Asian boy you always looked down on. Rebecca stopped closing the door, clearly irritated by the change of subject. What does that kid have to do with anything? You've always had a strange obsession with collecting losers, Sam. Losers. She had just called Daniel Chen a loser. Daniel, who at 12 was already fixing neighbors' computers for pocket money. Daniel, who graduated as valedictorian from high school with a full scholarship to MIT. Daniel, who sent me enthusiastic letters about his engineering projects and his ideas for revolutionizing technology. You never liked him because he was different, I muttered, remembering the countless times Rebecca made cruel comments about Daniel's appearance, his background, even his exceptional intelligence, which she always dismissed as Asian luck. It was weird, Sam. An Asian kid showing up out of nowhere and you treating him like your son. People talked. It was embarrassing. Embarrassing. She found it embarrassing when I saved a child from abusive parents and raised her with love and dignity. Richard checked his watch again, clearly bored with our conversation. Look, Sam, this trip down memory lane is touching, but we have an important dinner tonight. We need to get ready. Important dinner, I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Sure. Don't let me get in the way of your important social events. As they prepared to close the door for good, my mind flew back to that last day with Daniel before he left for Boston. We were sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Mr. Sam, he had said, using the respectful title he insisted on maintaining even after all these years. You know I'll never forget what you did for me, right? When I succeed in life, I'll repay you for all of this. I promise. I had laughed and ruffled his hair. You don't owe me anything, son. Just be happy and make a difference in the world. Now, 15 years later, as my sister rejected me at the door of her perfect house, I finally understood what Daniel meant that day. You know, Rebecca, I said, my voice taking on an almost casual tone. Daniel always sends me Christmas cards. To this day. Even after all these years. She sighed impatiently. So what? What does that have to do with you finding a place to sleep tonight? Nothing probably, I replied, taking a step back. It's just that sometimes I wonder how he's doing out there in Silicon Valley. Last I heard, he had started some tech company. Richard let out a dismissive laugh. Sure you did. I bet he's selling used computers at some backyard store. They closed the door. I stood there for a few minutes, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. My own sister, the person I had sacrificed my best years for, had just treated me like human trash. But as I walked back to my broken truck, a strange feeling began to take hold of me. It wasn't despair or self-pity. It was something much more dangerous. It was clarity. Rebecca had no idea who she had just dismissed. She knew nothing about the man Daniel Chun had become. And when she found out, when she fully understood what had just happened at this door, well, some mistakes are impossible to undo. I picked up my phone with steady hands and found the contact I hadn't used in years. It was time to find out if loyalty worked both ways. Sitting in my broken truck, the windows fogged up by the Nashville humidity, I stared at the name Daniel Chun on my phone screen for several long minutes. My hands trembled slightly, not from the cold of the night, but from the uncertainty of being about to interrupt the life of someone who had probably moved on long ago. 15 years. That was enough time for someone to completely forget a farmer in the countryside who had taken them in as a child. I took a deep breath and tapped the number before I could change my mind. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar but more mature voice answered. Hello. Daniel. My voice came out hoarser than I expected. It's Sam. Sam Morrison. The silence on the other end lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Mr. Sam. The change in his voice was instant and electric. My God, Mr. Sam. Are you okay? Did something happen? Tears I didn't know were forming began to stream down my face. Even after all these years, his first concern was for me. Son, I managed to say through the lump in my throat. I'm sorry for calling you out of the blue like this. I know you must have a busy life now, but... Stop that, he interrupted me firmly but kindly. You can call me anytime, anywhere, for any reason. You know that. Now tell me what happened. So I told him. About the fire that devastated my farm in a matter of hours. About losing 43 years of work and memories. About going to Rebecca's house asking only for a place to sleep and being rejected as if I were a strange beggar. About Richard calling me homeless and caring more about an expensive rug than my well-being. Daniel listened without interrupting, making only occasional sounds of growing indignation. That woman is not your sister, he said when I finished, his voice laden with a controlled anger that reminded me of the protective teenager he used to be. A sister doesn't abandon the person who raised her. You sacrificed your youth so she could have an education, and now she treats you like trash. She's still my sister, Daniel. No, Mr. Sam. Siblings don't do that. Real family doesn't do that. His voice took on a determination I didn't recognize. Do you know what the difference is between us? You chose me as your son when I had no one. She's your sister only by accident of birth, but she continues to choose to be cruel. There was something in his tone that made me sit up straighter in the truck seat. This was no longer the shy boy who used to help me with farm chores. There was an authority in his voice that suggested real success. Daniel, about your life now. I hear you've been successful in technology. He laughed, a humorless sound. Mr. Sam, do you remember when I said that one day I would repay you for everything you did for me? You don't owe me anything, son. Maybe not, but I wanted to repay you anyway. My company, Chen Technologies, was sold to Google 2 years ago for $2.8 billion. The phone almost slipped out of my hand. Billions. Billions. And every penny I earned, every opportunity one had, every door that opened for me, started at that kitchen table of yours where you taught me that I was worth something. Where you showed me that family is about choice, not blood. My mind struggled to process this information. The skinny kid who used to stay up late doing homework was now a billionaire. Mr. Sam, where are you right now? In the parking lot across from Rebecca's house. I know how this sounds. It sounds like someone in shock, which is understandable. There's a Marriott about 20 minutes north on Route 65. Do you know it? I knew it. It was the hotel where Rebecca and Richard had their wedding reception, the same place she always mentioned when she wanted to impress people. I know it, but Daniel, I can't afford it. You won't pay anything. I'll call them now and reserve the presidential suite. Go there, take a hot shower, order room service, and try to rest. Can you do that for me? Presidential suite. My brain was still trying to adjust to the new reality. Son, that's very generous, but you don't have to. Mr. Sam, his voice softened. Do you remember what you told me the night before I left for MIT? You said that family takes care of family, no matter what. You said that when someone we love is hurt, we don't hesitate. We don't make excuses. We just show up. The words came back to me. I had said that, trying to teach him about loyalty and love in a way his biological parents never did. I remember. Well, I'm showing up. And Mr. Sam? There's something else you need to know about what I've been doing with my life since I left Tennessee. My heart began to beat faster. There was something in his voice that suggested the story was about to take a completely different turn. What? For the past 5 years, I've been making strategic investments throughout the South, including here in Nashville. I've bought stakes in several local companies, some commercial buildings downtown, and I have a considerable network of contacts in local business and politics. I began to understand where this was going, and a strange feeling began to form in my chest. It wasn't exactly hope, but something stronger. Rebecca has no idea who she just turned down, Daniel continued. She doesn't know that the Asian kid she always looked down on now has more power in a single bank account than she and Richard will ever see in 10 lifetimes. Daniel. Tomorrow morning, I'm flying to Nashville. There are some people I need to meet in person, and there's a conversation I need to have with your sister and her husband." The tone in his voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't the gentle boy I had raised. This was a businessman who had learned to wield real power. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." "You're not causing trouble." They caused trouble for themselves the moment they decided to humiliate the most important man in my life. His voice took on a coldness that made me more aware of the powerful man he had become. "But Mr. Sam, before anything happens, I need you to understand one thing." "What?" "Starting today, you will never again worry about money, housing, or security. You will never again ask for help from anyone who treats you as less than you deserve. And you will certainly never again stand in a parking lot with nowhere to go." As I hung up the phone and drove to the Marriott, a slow and powerful realization began to take shape in my mind. Rebecca had rejected more than her brother that night. She had rejected the man who created one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country. And when Daniel arrived in Nashville tomorrow, when Rebecca discovered exactly who this Asian kid she had always looked down on really was, her perfect life would never be the same again. Some bridges, when burned, take everything else with them. Rebecca had just lit the match that would destroy her own world. But she didn't know it yet. The Marriott's presidential suite was more luxurious than any place I had ever set foot in. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of Nashville, and a bathroom bigger than the kitchen of my old farmhouse. The contrast between being homeless 12 hours earlier and now bathing in a hot tub was too surreal to fully process. Daniel had kept his word in every detail. Room service brought dinner that cost more than I spent on food in a week, and the hotel staff treated me like royalty, clearly instructed by someone with considerable influence. As I slipped into the silk robe provided by the hotel, my phone rang. "Mr. Sam, I just landed at the airport. I'll be there in 40 minutes. "Daniel, son, you really didn't have to come all this way. A phone call would have been more than enough." "Mr. Sam," his voice took on that serious tone I was learning to recognize. "You need to understand something. When I was a child, you didn't just give me shelter. You gave me dignity. You taught me that I was worth something when the whole world was telling me otherwise. Now it's my turn to repay that dignity." 28 minutes later, I heard a commotion in the hallway. Whispering voices, hurried footsteps, the kind of commotion that accompanies important people. When the door opened, Daniel Chen entered, followed by two men in suits who were clearly assistants or security guards. He had changed since our farm days, but his eyes still carried the same focused intensity one remembered from the boy who stayed up late studying at my kitchen table. Now, however, there was something more, an absolute confidence that came from someone accustomed to moving mountains with a single word. "Mr. Sam." He hugged me with genuine warmth. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly? Confused. Yesterday, I was a homeless farmer. Today I'm in a suite that probably costs more per night than I used to earn per month." Daniel laughed, but his mood quickly turned more serious. "About your sister and her husband. I've spent the last few hours doing some research." He gestured to one of the assistants, who opened a laptop on the elegant dining table. "Richard Caldwell. Corporate lawyer at Morrison, Palmer & Associates, ironically, the same firm where Rebecca is a partner. They specialize in real estate law for high-net-worth clients." The screen showed photos of Richard at social events, always with an arrogant expression and expensive clothes. "Their financial situation is interesting," Daniel continued. "They live well beyond their actual means. The house costs $800,000 with a $650,000 mortgage. 2 luxury cars financed. Credit cards maxed out to keep up appearances." I frowned. "How did you get this information so quickly?" "Mr. Sam, when you have the resources I have, information becomes a commodity. And Nashville, despite being a big city, still operates much like a small town when it comes to business circles." The second assistant approached and whispered something in Daniel's ear, who nodded gravely. Even more interesting, Richard owes significant favors to several influential people in the city. Favors that can be redirected. There was something in the way he said it that made me gulp. This was no longer the kind boy I had raised. This was a businessman who understood how power really worked. "Daniel, I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." "Mr. Sam, you don't understand." He turned to face me directly. "You're not asking me for help. I'm choosing to offer justice. There's a difference. He gestured to the view of the city through the windows. See that building over there? One Commerce Plaza? I bought 40% of the shares 2 years ago. The Davidson Center building? Mine. The Pinnacle Hotel chain throughout Tennessee? A joint investment of mine with a group from Seoul. My mind struggled to process the scale of what he was describing. Over the past 5 years, I've invested strategically in Nashville not only as a business opportunity, but because I always knew I would return home one day. To where my real family lives. He paused in front of the window, looking out at the city he apparently owned a considerable part of. Richard and Rebecca operate in a very small circle of elite lawyers and businesspeople. A circle that depends entirely on reputation and connections to survive. When those connections turn against them. What exactly are you planning, son? Daniel smiled, and for the first time I saw a glimpse of the mischievous boy who used to play pranks on the neighbors when we were younger. Tomorrow morning, there's a networking event at Rebecca's Country Club. A charity luncheon where all of Nashville's legal and business elite gather to see and be seen. Richard has always been obsessed with these events. It's where he gets most of his important clients. He turned to me with an expression that was a mixture of affection and cold determination. I'm going to show up as a surprise guest. And when I introduce you as my adoptive father, the only family that really matters to me, all those people will understand exactly who Rebecca and Richard rejected last night. The idea made me feel anxious and excited at the same time. What if they tried to downplay what they did? Or lie about how they treated me? Mr. Sam, people like Rebecca and Richard have a fatal flaw. They believe they are smarter than they really are. They will try to explain, justify, maybe even attack. And every word they say will only dig a deeper hole. He went back to his laptop and showed me a list of names and photos. These are the people who will be there tomorrow. Judges, CEOs, local politicians, community leaders. Half of them already do business with me directly or indirectly. The other half would like to. I then realized the cruel genius of the plan. Rebecca and Richard would not be confronted in private, where they could control the narrative. They would be exposed publicly, in front of the very people whose opinions mattered most to them. If you're following this incredible story of family upheaval, be sure to subscribe to the channel to see how the pieces fit together in the end. But Daniel, I said, a worry growing in my chest. What if this destroys her career? Her life? Mr. Sam, you need to understand something fundamental about consequences. Rebecca didn't just reject you. She rejected the values you stood for. She chose status over family, appearance over substance, cruelty over compassion. He closed his laptop with a decisive movement. Tomorrow, she will learn that these choices come at a price. And sometimes, the price is losing the very thing you chose to preserve. That night, as I lay down in the most comfortable bed I had ever slept in, a mixture of complex emotions overwhelmed me. Excitement, anxiety, and something that took me a while to identify. The feeling that for the first time in my life, someone was fighting for me with the same ferocity with which I had fought for others. Daniel had become the man I had always hoped he would become. But tomorrow, Rebecca would discover that rejecting that man had been the biggest mistake of her life. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. And for my sister, that education was about to begin. The Nashville Country Club was exactly as I had imagined it would be. Elite members strolled through the meticulously manicured grounds, wearing clothes that cost more than most people earn in a year, carrying that air of superiority that comes from generations of inherited privilege. Daniel had organized everything perfectly. We arrived in his black Bentley, apparently one of his more discreet cars, and were greeted at the entrance like dignitaries. The club manager practically bowed when he saw Daniel step out of the vehicle. Mr. Chun, it is an honor to have you with us today. Your table is ready as requested. As we walked through the main hall, I could see the whispers following our passage. Daniel Chun was clearly recognized and respected in the circle, even if many didn't know exactly who he was personally. Are you ready for this, Mr. Sam? Daniel asked as he adjusted his Hermes tie. Honestly? I'm nervous. But I'm also curious to see her face when she finds out who you've become. We spotted Rebecca and Richard almost immediately. They were in the center of a group of well-dressed people, Rebecca gesturing animatedly as she told some story that made the others laugh politely. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than I earned in 3 months on the farm, and Richard flashed that arrogant smile I had grown to detest. They seem quite comfortable in their natural environment, Daniel observed, his tone carrying a coldness that reminded me of the ruthless businessman he had become. Daniel, we can still reconsider this. Perhaps a private conversation would be. Mr. Sam, he interrupted me gently. People like Rebecca and Richard operate through public humiliation. It's the only language they really understand. When you went to her house asking for help, she could have politely said no in private. Instead, she chose to humiliate you in front of the neighbors. He was right. Rebecca had made sure our conversation was public enough for several neighbors to hear her cruel words. Daniel gestured to one of the event organizers, an elegant woman in her 50s who approached immediately when she saw him. Mr. Chun, how lovely to see you here. We didn't know you would be attending today. Margaret, I'd like to introduce my adoptive father, Sam Morrison. He raised me when I was a child, and I owe everything I am today to him. Margaret's eyes lit up with genuine interest. Mr. Morrison, what an honor to meet you. Daniel often tells us about his childhood and the person who inspired him to become the man he is today. I felt my face flush slightly. Daniel really did talk about me to these important people. Actually, Daniel continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone, I would like to give a short speech today if possible. About family loyalty, and the values that really matter in business. Of course. I would be honored to introduce you to the group. That's when I noticed Rebecca looking in our direction. She had stopped talking mid-story, her eyes narrowing as she tried to identify who the impeccably dressed Asian man causing such a stir was. Recognition slowly began to dawn on her expression. The shape of his face, perhaps, or the way he stood so upright. Her lips parted slightly as the realization began to take shape. Attention, everyone. Margaret called out, tapping a champagne glass with a silver spoon. We have a very special guest with us today. I am pleased to introduce Daniel Chun, CEO of Chen Technologies and one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country. The room fell into respectful silence. Daniel stood up, his presence commanding the immediate attention of everyone present. Thank you, Margaret. It is a privilege to be here today with such distinguished members of the Nashville business community. His voice carried a natural authority that completely silenced the room. This was a man accustomed to speaking to powerful audiences. Today I would like to talk about family. Not the family we are born into, but the family we choose and who chooses us back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Rebecca turning pale. Richard looked confused, not yet fully understanding what was happening. When I was 8 years old, Daniel continued, I ran away from home. My biological parents were violent alcoholics who saw a child as nothing more than an obstacle to their addictions. The audience listened in respectful silence, clearly moved by the raw honesty of his story. I showed up at a local farmer's door, dirty, scared, and hungry. This man could have sent me away, could have called social services, could have decided that a troubled Asian child was not his responsibility. Daniel paused, his eyes meeting mine for a moment. Instead, Sam Morrison opened his home, his dinner table, and his heart to me. He raised me as his own son, worked 3 jobs to give me opportunities one could never have dreamed of, and taught me that true family is about choice, not blood. Approving murmurs echoed around the room. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of admiration and respect. Mr. Morrison, Daniel said, gesturing for me to stand up. Would you join me here? I stood up with slightly shaky legs, still not fully believing what was happening. This is the man, Daniel said, placing a protective hand on my shoulder, who sacrificed his own dreams so that an abandoned child could have a chance at life. Every success I've achieved, every door that's opened for me, every opportunity I've been given, began at this man's kitchen table. The audience applauded warmly. I saw tears in the eyes of several people, clearly moved by the story. It was then that Daniel looked directly at where Rebecca and Richard were standing, both now completely pale. Unfortunately, his voice took on a colder tone. Not every family understands the value of loyalty. Last night, after losing everything in a fire that destroyed his farm, my father came to his own sister for help. The room grew tense. People could sense that the story was taking a darker turn. He was rejected at the door. Cold homeless. Treated like an unwanted beggar by people who had benefited from his sacrifices for decades. Now all eyes were turning to Rebecca and Richard, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Rebecca Caldwell, Daniel said, his voice carrying an authority that made the name echo through the room like an accusation. "Would you like to explain to your colleagues and clients why you thought it appropriate to publicly humiliate the man who created your own opportunities?" Rebecca opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Richard tried to step forward, clearly attempting to control the damage. "Mr. Chun, there has been a misunderstanding. Sam showed up at our house unannounced, and You cared more about a Persian rug than basic human dignity," Daniel cut him off, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You called a man who lost everything in a tragedy homeless, as if it were a contagious disease." The silence in the hall was deafening. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, presumably to record this extraordinary moment. "It may interest you to know," Daniel continued, "that Sam Morrison is not only my adoptive father. He is also the new chairman of the advisory board of the Chin Foundation for Rural Development, a position that comes with an annual salary of $500,000. Audible gasps echoed around the room. "In addition, in recognition of his years of service to the community, I have just gifted him a 50-acre property in Franklin, completely free of taxes and mortgages." Rebecca finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate squeak. "Tommy? Your little Tommy Chin? The boy who lived. Who you treated like human trash." Daniel finished for her. "Yes, that's me. The troubled Asian kid you always looked down on. The same one who now employs over 3,000 people in Tennessee and contributes more taxes to this state than your firm will ever see." Rebecca's embarrassment was palpable. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. "Daniel, if we had known who you were, we obviously would have." "Would have what?" Daniel's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Treated my father with dignity just because I have money? That makes it worse, not better." He turned to the audience, who were watching this drama unfold with horrified fascination. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed exactly the kind of people you should not do business with. People who judge human worth by bank account, who abandon family in times of need, and who treat vulnerability as moral weakness." Rebecca and Richard's social power was being systematically destroyed before their own peers. I could see from the faces around the room that the damage to their reputation would be irreversible. But Daniel wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Marcus? Yes, it's me. Can you cancel that meeting we had scheduled with Morrison, Palmer and Associates? Change of plans. No forever." He hung up and looked directly at Rebecca and Richard. "That was a $12 million development contract that your firm had been negotiating with me for 6 months. Consider it cancelled." Rebecca let out a strangled sound. $12 million represented probably the biggest opportunity of her career. As Daniel continued to methodically dismantle their professional and social lives, a single question echoed in my mind. After this complete public humiliation, what would be left of Rebecca and Richard? And more importantly, had Daniel planned only this presentation, or was there something even more devastating waiting for them? Judging by the cold smile on his face, our revenge was just beginning. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my new property in Franklin, watching Daniel teach his 5-year-old son to fish in the lake that was now part of our land. The irony was not lost on me. The abandoned Asian boy I had taken in now gave me grandchildren through my heart, not my blood. "Grandpa Sam," the child shouted, using the title Daniel had taught him without my asking. "I caught a huge fish." Daniel smiled at me over his son's head. "He's insisted on calling you Grandpa ever since we moved here. I hope you don't mind." "It's the greatest honor of my life," I replied, feeling tears of joy that had become frequent since my real life began. My phone rang. It was Margaret from the country club. "Sam, I thought you'd like to know. Rebecca and Richard were forced to sell their house last week. Apparently, clients started canceling contracts after that incident. The firm fired them both." I felt no cruel satisfaction at the news. Just a quiet sadness at the waste of it all. "Where are they now?" "I heard they moved into a small apartment across town. Richard is working as a criminal defense attorney. Apparently it's the only job he could get. Rebecca, well, the last time I saw her she was at the supermarket wearing a cashier's uniform." After I hung up, Daniel approached, leaving his son playing with his new toy fish. "News about Rebecca?" "They lost everything. They're working regular jobs now." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Mr. Sam, I've learned something important these past few months. Revenge isn't about destroying people, it's about restoring balance. Rebecca and Richard didn't lose their lives because of my malice. They lost because they finally faced the natural consequences of their choices. He was right. For decades, they had operated in a world where social cruelty had no real price. Daniel had simply removed that artificial protection. And most importantly, he continued, you discovered something I've always known. True family has nothing to do with DNA. It has to do with choice, loyalty, and unconditional love. That night, as we dined at the wooden table Daniel had specially made for our home, large enough for the family we were building, I received an unexpected message. It was from Rebecca. Sam, I know I don't deserve your attention after everything. But I've lost everything, and I finally understand what you always tried to teach me about family. If you can ever forgive me. I showed the message to Daniel, who read it silently. What are you going to do? I looked around the table. Daniel and his wife, Sarah, who treated me like the father she never had. My adopted grandson, who drew pictures for me every day. The life I had built based on genuine love, not family obligation. I'll respond, I finally said. But not today. Maybe in a few months, when she's had enough time to really understand what it means to apologize. Daniel smiled. You've always been too wise for me. A year later, we inaugurated the Morrison Foundation for Rural Families, dedicated to helping struggling farmers and abandoned children. Rebecca attended the inauguration, not as privileged family, but as a volunteer, working quietly in the kitchen, serving food to people she would once have looked down on. We didn't talk that day. But when our eyes met through the kitchen window, I saw something I had never seen before, real humility. Some people have to lose everything to discover what really matters. Rebecca was beginning her journey back to humanity. As for me, I learned that sometimes the fire that destroys your old life is just God clearing the ground for something much better to grow. If this story of redemption and true family has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how real justice always finds its way. Because in the end, I discovered that I wasn't abandoned by my family. I was set free to find my true family. And that difference made all the difference in the world.